Just before any drumbeat dares to ripple the soft indigo pre-dawn over the Imbabala encampment, a quieter rhythm unfolds, one so muted that only someone drifting between waking and sleep might notice it. In that hush, shield makers rise with the milky breath of cooking fires, gently collecting bundles of stiff grass brushes and calabashes of pigment they left steeping overnight. Tonight, our first unhurried walk through a new series, we will linger beside their work mats counting bristles, listening to calabash plugs, loosen with dull little pops, and tracing the tiny arithmetic that turns raw cowhide into a polished oval ready to catch morning light. No fierce ululations await us here, only the calm bureaucracy of hide thicknesses, bead strings, and pigment ratios details so soothingly precise they almost sing a lullaby of their own. The hide itself begins its journey weeks earlier, but for our purposes it lies already scraped and stretched on a short rack just inside a thorn fence, its pale underside exposed to a breeze that smells faintly of river reed and ashes. Each hide matches a size the quartermaster calls 3 cubits and a hand, approximately 49 inches, yet the artisan still passes a thumb along the edge, confirming no portion dips below 9 hairs' breadth and thickness. He keeps a thin sliver of flat bone filed to the shape of a swimmer's paddle tucked in his waistband. He slides it beneath the hide and taps it with one fingernail, registering pitch. A high, quick ring would mean excess thinness. Tonight's tap returns a comforting low thock, as if the hide itself prefers lingering weight. A's small entry goes into his ledger. C, through risk no. Tone, kettle warm. The phrase kettle warm has no numeric value, but everyone in camp knows it promises a shield that will bend just enough, never flop. Nearby, a junior apprentice prepares pigment. The black comes from soot gathered inside last season's cooking pottery, scraped by antelope horn spoon, then sifted through woven grass sieves until only the finest dust remains. The red is ochre ground from a small cliff 2 valleys east, its granules mashed with fine quartz sand to keep it honest. Both powders rest in smoke-poured bowls whose curved interiors grow darker as each new batch stains deeper. A third gourd holds rendered goat tallow, faintly sweet and resistant to rancid airs. The apprentice warms this tallow with an ember the size of a hawk's egg, stirring with a sliver of mopane twig until mixture size into the consistency of slow honey. When the viscosity feels right, judged by how long a bead clings before sliding, he drops in pinches of pigment, 1 pinch per exhale, black first, red second, never mixing the two. Stirring continues until the surface shows a lazy clockwise drift, an omen that the oily suspension is balanced between heaviness and glide. Brushes matter next. They are not fashioned from horsehair or boar bristle, but from the stout ends of pond grass harvested in early dry season. Each stalk, once stripped of its feathery top, reveals a fibrous core resembling thin reeds of lacquered copper. 12 such strands twist into a bundle, bound with hide thong, then trimmed square so the painting edge measures exactly the width of a tight pinched thumb. This measure not quite an inch renders stripes that align neatly with the finger-wide spacing preferred by Imbabala captains. Before use, brushes are soaked briefly in a wooden bowl of river water to persuade stray fibers to settle. Droplets bead on gleaming stalks. The artisan pinches them away with 2 fingers, flicking moisture into the dust where it vanishes like thoughts outrun by sleep. Pattern choice seldom wavers. A diagonal ladder of black rectangles stepping upward across pale hide, each rung bordered by slender red lines. But the spacing remains subject to nightly review. A clay tablet near the work mat bears shallow incisions marking last season's ratios. Black bars 3 finger widths, tall by 1.5 wide, separated by 2 fingers of unpainted hide. Tonight, a lieutenant suggests narrowing the unpainted gap by a half finger to quicken the eye's travel across the shield. Debate is hushed, conducted with sticks tracing in dust. Eventually consensus returns to tradition, Too tight a pattern risks blending from afar, muddling identification signals when dawn fog hovers. The lieutenant accepts the ruling with a shrug, jotting a note in charcoal on the clay. Gap holds, then smoothing the dust lines away. Now pigment meets hide. The artisan plants his knees on a goatskin pad, brushes poised like polite guests, waiting their turn at communal porridge. He presses the brush's blunt tip into black mixture until fibers drink their fill and glisten. The first stroke begins at the upper left quadrant of the hide, sweeping diagonally downward with no pause. Observers might expect tremor, but the line emerges steady years of muscle memory pacing wrist elasticity. He lifts brush at mid-hide, allowing oils to seep before continuing. That pause lasts roughly 2 heartbeats measured against his own calm pulse, a span anyone could miss unless listening for it. Each subsequent stroke follows suit, ladder rungs stacking in sleepy procession. Between black strokes, the apprentice rinses brush, ends in a small calabash of water scented with wild mint. The water darkens, absorbing stray soot, then is gently poured onto thirsty ground after each session, never reused. Red pigment brushes border the black now, edges crisp, each line only half a thumb wide. If a drop roams outside intended width, the artisan wipes gently with a strip of dry hide, not cloth, because hide shares the same oils and leaves no lighter fingerprint. Mistakes remain rare. When they do occur, a brief ledger mark records pigment loss and drops, not weight, as though acknowledging the effort without brooding. Drying proceeds beside low coals. Parents hush children away lest running feet raise dust. The shield stands propped against a forked stick, paint facing inward to shelter from dew's caress. Occasionally, the artisan passes a palm over the surface. When it emerges faintly oily but free of stain, he pronounces the work sleeping. Finished shields gather in rows by the fence, each leaning at the same angle, a geometry invisible to casual glance, but obvious if one counts shadow lengths at moonset. Those shadows measure half a spear in length from base to tip, perfect for identifying positions in near darkness without speaking. Later, before sunrise drums, captains inspect. They run fingertips along paint ridges, so slight they mimic thread seams, checking for raised burrs that might snag. They knock knuckles on hide edges, listening for tightness. One captain, known for absent-minded humming, sings a low note between knocks. The echo reveals whether the frame lashing remained taut across cool night air. Satisfied, he applies a final dab of melted tallow along the handle grip, ensuring hands glide in and out without squeak. Ledger entries at this stage read merely, approved, their brevity masking how much measurement and whisper preceded the stamp. Numbers follow. Each shield receives a tally notch cut into its central wooden spine. Notches correspond to squad within regiment. The knife used for notching has its own small history. A bone-handled tool kept wrapped in calfskin with ink formula, scratched faintly on the blade. Nobody sharpens it lest new edge subtract a sliver of width, altering notch depth and potentially confusing counts. So the blade dulls gently, but shield wood is soft, and the notch glides in regardless, as gentle as chalk on slate. Finally, shields return to their bearers. A warrior receives his freshly painted hide, much like accepting a folded blanket. He turns it once, twice, admiring patterns nobody remarks upon because pride whispers louder than speech. He slots his arm through, flexes elbow, listens for crackle of accommodating fibers, then sets shield aside to allow paint another hour's cure while warming his porridge of sorghum and goat milk. He may notice pigment smell mixing with porridge steam. He does not mind. The mixture evokes readiness, yet invites calm, a strange but steady partnership. If you many years later stood near the museum vitrines where surviving shields rest, you would still discern pigment ridges under gloved fingertips and perhaps the faintest hint of beeswax or goat tallow if curators permitted. You would see diagonal ladders consistent across decades, gaps maintained at 2 finger widths because a lieutenant's late-night idea yielded to tradition's slower breathing. You would note some shields sporting open-top four-shaped maker's marks borrowed from shipping crates, left by traders, a quiet reminder that craft seldom lives in isolation. Now, as you lie beneath your own roof, imagine the hush just before sunrise drums. Picture artisans kneeling, brushes poised, counting pigment drops by heartbeats, letting each ladder rung fall into place like orderly breaths. Imagine goat hide pads giving their mild scent to the breeze, ledger pages receiving tiny notes inked with soot softened by spit, brushes soaking in mint water baths cooled by night air. Let those rhythms guide your breathing. Inhale for the brush dipping into pigment. Exhale for its travel across hide. Pause for 2 heartbeats as paint settles. Continue until ladder rungs climb across the shield of your eyelids, closing them gently, and dawn arrives not with war cries, but with the soft certainty of numbers painted just where they should be. Long before the first shaft of sunrise slips between the blue gums of the Imbabala camp, another more measured ray of anticipation glints from a row of polished wooden pegs. These are the tuning keys for the war drums, and they turn by increments so minor that even dust seems reluctant to notice. Tonight, our second wander through the gentle bureaucracy behind a warrior's dawn. We crouch beside the drum masters, counting hide fibers, twisting sinew cords, half a breath at a time, and charting the sleepy mathematics of resonance that must neither rouse distant herds nor disappoint the captain's ear when he lifts his hand to summon the first cadence. No thunder will break here, only the quiet stretch of goat skin, the low cough of test beats, and the ledger notes that tally how many drops of river moisture each drum drinks before declaring itself ready. The principal drum sits on a mat woven of Alala palm fronds, its shell carved months earlier from a single kiat log, hollowed by fire-softened chisels. It stands waist-high, yet the master crouches so that his eye lines exactly with the rim. From this vantage, he can detect a micron of warp by the faint asymmetry of starlight reflecting across the lacquered wood. The rim carries 16 holes bored equidistant, each threaded with rawhide thongs that lace upward to grab the drumhead. Those thongs resemble a corset patiently tightened. Indeed, the master pulls each thong not with brute strength, but with a small bone lever carved from a wildebeest's shin. The lever slots behind the thong, turns half a turn, precisely the angle between horizon and moon's right horn, and stops. He then moves to the next, repeating in a spiral pattern until all 16 thongs glimmer with uniform tension. Before any tightening occurs, however, the goatskin head soaks in a trough of stream water carried at twilight. Water temperature is tested by dipping 2 fingers and silently counting to 7. If chill shocks before 6, the trough must warm by absorbing night air longer. If warmth persists beyond 7, a few ladles of cooler water join. Soaking lasts exactly as long as it takes to hum the river lullaby 4 times. Apprentices keep tempo by tapping fingernails on the trough rim like rain rehearsing. Once pliant, skin is lifted, stretched across a low frame, and the master traces thumbprints along its underside, hunting imperfections rough as uncooked millet. When he finds one, he circles it with charred stick, then thins the spot using a smooth river pebble rubbed in tight spirals no larger than a beetle. This erasure lowers local density, ensuring resonance stays even an act akin to sanding a single grain from a wooden table, so cups will never wobble. Mounting the head begins with aligning a tiny ink dot drawn earlier where hair whorl met center, with a notch carved into the shell's rim. The dot-to-notch marriage serves future maintenance. Should the head ever need loosening during rainy season, craftsmen will know precisely how to reseat it. Thongs pass through head's perimeter holes, their ends bifurcated like split reeds and braided into the shell loops. Apprentices moisten their palms with a mix of water and a whisper of marula oil, easing braids without squeak. Any sound above a sigh invites a paused breath, a check, and a rebraid if necessary. Records in a goatskin booklet show last dry season averaged 3 squeaks per drum. This season, only 2, a statistical improvement celebrated with restrained nods. Tensioning follows the spiral. Bone lever in, half turn, lever out, slide right. The master keeps a pebble in his mouth, transferring it from cheek to cheek each completed circuit. When pebble reaches original side, he knows 3 full spirals passed, time to test. Testing stroke is not a strike, but a gentle push of the palm, letting drums speak in a voice low as distant cattle. The sound should hover between 2 internal reference pitches, memorized by the master one, called deep grass, the other quiet storm. If tone sags below grass, a 4th spiral tightens. If it climbs above storm, thongs loosen an 1/8 of a turn each. Ledger notes capture these judgments with poetic brevity: hovered grass good, or near storm breath down. Moisture balance arrives next. The skin, still supple, must not dry unevenly overnight. Apprentices fold damp reeds into brush shapes and lightly feather the head's underside with river water, painting concentric rings from center outward, counting 9 rings exactly. They then face the drumhead toward the embers of a nearly spent fire never flame and let radiant warmth coax mild evaporation. A lump of beeswax the size of a sparrow's egg melts in a tin dish. Using an index finger, the master draws a wax circle along the perimeter seam where skin meets shell, sealing pores against rogue airflow. The wax line's width equates to the thickness of 2 grass seeds laid side by side, measured visually, but with an accuracy history proves consistent. Smaller signal drums follow similar rituals, but on miniaturized scale. Their shells, hollowed from sausage tree branches, carry 8 thongs rather than 16. Skin thickness is half, so soak time divides accordingly to lullaby cycles, not 4. Signal drums must match a pitch called bird flick, higher than conversation yet low enough not to invite echo off distant copies. Pitch is gauged by tapping and humming simultaneously. When hum cancels tap resonance to near silence, frequencies align. The master's assistant, tasked with note memory, keeps a beeswax whistle tuned to bird flick. He blows once each testing round. If drum and whistle unify, a small chalk dot appears on the shell interior. 3 dots signify final approval. During these adjustments, scribes seated on reed mats document every lever pull and wax smear. Their ink derives from crushed termite mound clay mixed with burnt marrow. Its color is warm rust that dries matte on bark paper pages. Page margins host minuscule tally marks, noting how many drumheads split this season, how many thongs were placed, and even how many drops of oil vanished when a calabash cracked. The scribes write with porcupine quills. Each quill tip lasts 8 lines before needing trim. Quills collected in a gourd show notches. Scribes prefer tips trimmed at an angle reminiscent of the crescent moon, aiding smooth left to right strokes. Once drums pass audit, they leave the tensing area to rest on wooden cradles. Overhead, guards hang reed bundles to deter dewdrip. Each bundle measured a forearm wide, weighing down edges so wind won't rock drums. Any lateral motion would coax chords out of tune by morning. To gauge stillness, the master suspends a strand of spider silk between 2 stakes beside the resting cradles. If breeze arises, silk quivers. If silk stays straight, drums remain undisturbed. Ledger note, spider wire steady, night holds breath. Insects thrumming around lamps compose the only music allowed until dawn signal. At first gray hint on eastern sky, an apprentice kneels, placing his ear against the largest drum's rim. He raps lightly 3 times. Returning echo hums steady. Only then does he tip a gourd of fine river sand against each thong knot, sand serving as disposable timer, grains cling low air cool. When sunworms hide later, grains fall away, reminding musicians midday retune might help. This sand timer tradition began after a particularly humid campaign. Its first appearance in ledgers reads, "Sand whispers readiness for heat." Warriors assembling later may believe drums were always perfect, Yet behind that perfection lurks this slumber-slow bureaucratic ballet. The master signs off with a thumbprint dipped in soda page bottom, prints deliberately smudged, so no rival artisan can claim which them identity dissolving into texture, much like the drum as voice dissolves into dawn. So as your evening settles, imagine bone lovers twisting half-turns, goat skin sighing, pebble passing cheek to cheek, and spider silk abstaining from ripple. Let each tightening spiral correspond to a breath in, each test tap a breath out, until your own resonance hovers between deep grass. And quiet storm balanced, law-abiding, and ready to glide into the silence that precedes all genuine cadences. Long before a spear glints in direct sunlight, its wooden shaft spends many uncelebrated nights reclining across low trestles, accumulating layer after layer of hand-rubbed oil, while watchers count heartbeats between strokes. In the Imbabala camp, the spear polishers rise well before the starlight dims, not to wage battle, but to perform the mildly hypnotic art of burnishing equal chafs until they reflect dawn in miniature. Tonight, our third lull among the quiet labors behind a warrior's dawn, we plant ourselves beside those trestles, measuring the slow drip of marula oil, weighing charcoal powder by pinches too tiny to alarm the scale of attention, and recording the near imperceptible hiss that sapwood releases when persuaded into perfect alignment. The only sparks here are from cedar shavings worming over a shell of coals, and they fall so softly that even the night crickets pause to listen. A spear shaft begins as a slender stave of assegai wood harvested during last year's waning moon cycle when sap flow slacked. Each stave dries upright for 9 moons, its ends capped with beeswax to discourage splits. When the quartermaster deems moisture content agreeable tested by touching the end grain to his cheek and counting the chill as heartbeats no longer than 5, he lays the stave on a low goat hide cradle. Here the first shave commences. A drac knife whose blade is curved like a slow smile peels ribbons thinner than onion skin. Those ribbons curled to the ground where apprentices gather them as fire starters. Ledger notes even mention average curl length, though no captain ever asked. After shaving, shafts rest 3 nights to let fibers settle. On each night, a thin string of vine wraps around the shaft at 3 points, 1 handspan below the socket, mid-by, and 1 handspan above the butt. The vine's tension speaks if the shaft warps. Too loose, and one hears a whispering creak when pressed. Too tight, and the vine leaves faint tooth marks. Only when all 3 vines retain equal tautness from dusk until rooster crow does the stave earn its first oiling. Oiling involves marula kernels roasted, then pounded in a stone mortar until they release a pale nutty liquor. This liquor is mixed with a single drop of malted honeycomb for every 4 spoons carved, incidentally, from broken drumsticks now retired to culinary peace. The mixture warms gently in a gourded bowl sat beside coals until surface trembles but never bubbles. Polisher Nandi dips her thumb and index finger, presses them together until a slippery meniscus peers out, then strokes along the wood in lines no wider than a grain of rice. She counts to 7 with each pass, chants a rhyme about river reeds aligning in current, and shifts 1/2 thumb's width around the shaft. By sunrise, she completes 2 full rotations, roughly 900 strokes, each logged by moving a pebble from one pottery dish to another. Charcoal dusting is next. Charcoal from burned knobthorn, crushed between smooth river stones, becomes powder as fine as talc. A feather stripped from a guinea foal provides the applicator. The purpose of dust is not color but microabrasion. It rides the oil, sliding into tiny pores, prompting them to collapse into smoother planes under subsequent buffs. Buffing employs a twist of linen salvaged from trader packing sacks. The linen is folded into 8 layers, creating a pad no thicker than a calloused palm. Between sunrise and breakfast, Nandai briskly rubs 30 buff cycles, each cycle consuming 4 inhalations and 4 exhalations. Her ledger shows she once reached 32, but considered that indulgent. After 3 such evenings, the shaft's surface resembles a dark river at night, broken only where sap knots breathe. The metal blade, forged elsewhere, arrives wrapped in antelope skin coated in fat to ward off rust. Attachment requires socket heating over embers until its size faintly never until it glows. The shaft's tenon, tapered by eye, using that same smile curved knife, slides home with a dull moan. Excess fat sears, releasing incense-like aroma reminiscent of roasted pumpkin seeds. Apprentices quench the joint with a wad of damp moss, trapping steam within fibers that swell to lock metal and wood like clasped hands falling asleep. Balance testing follows. A seesaw board, simply a narrow plank balanced over a round stone, receives the assembled spear. If the spear teeter's blade heavy, 2 grains of river sand tuck into a drilled cavity at butt end, sealed by a carved plug of ebony pressed with a thumbprint. If butt heavy, a sliver shaves from the base of blade socket using a file of rough sharkskin glued to cedar. Sharkskin rasping is so quiet one might mistake it for leaves stirring. Balance finalized, a side travels bench to bench, a nearly imperceptible ripple of communal satisfaction. Marking ownership employs red ochre and a reed stylus. Each warrior has a simple symbol, a leaning rectangle, a hooked swirl, or a pair of short bars that fits within a space no larger than a beetle's shell. The stylus tip dips into ochre paste mixed with yolk, then kisses the shaft twice, once under the blade joint, once above the butt plug. When dry, these marks withstand rain, yet scrape off with determined knife, so scribes duplicate them in a small book stored in an oxhorn tube, sealed with pitch. Should shaft and warrior part ways, book and markings reunite them, or so theory says. Those stories suggest spears prefer not to wander. On the night before deployment, freshly finished spears lean upright near hearth. Each metal blade receives a coat of clear grease made by simmering marrow with wild sage, just enough to perfume without overt scent. Grease blades catch firelight, casting tiny flickers onto rafters where swallow nests drowse. One apprentice, tasked with final inspection, presses his thumbnail against wood at 3 points. Indentation should spring back within 1 breath. He counts breath with lips barely parted, exhales soft as moth wings. If indentation lingers, he adds a final oil wipe. His ledger this season shows only 1 lingering indentation. He notes cause, sap pocket, center section, remedied. The phrase remedied seems to please him. He writes it again in smaller letters beneath, as though practicing for future errors. Spears rest on trestles until false dawn graze the sky. At that moment, the polisher returns, dabs a drop of water on each blade edge to test beading. Water should gather into beads, not spread sign that grease still holds. Beads reflect dawn's first blue, amplifying calm. After test, warriors lift spears from trestles with almost theatrical slowness, as if recognizing how many quiet hours soaked into fibers. No war shout yet, only the hush of collective breathing adjusting to added weight. Many seasons hence, some spears retire to storage huts. Their shafts lose some luster, yet when curators retrieve 1 decade later, they still smell faintly of marula oil, a whiff enough to relocate whoever sniffs into that dawn of brush strokes and pebble counts. Scholars weigh them on brass scales, noting balance remains true within a seed or 2 of original center. They trace ochre mark under blade joint. In hornbook, they find the same symbol, still legible. Ledger entries in gray pencil summarize: specimen 24, finish resilient, oil scent moderate, balance unaltered. Such entries, while dry, glow with the comfort of things behaving as promised. So, as night thickens around your own room, picture these trestles, marula oil bowls, and charcoal dust settling like sleepy snow on polished wood. Hear the quiet drag of linen buff, count pebble transfers, 1 per rotation, until your breath matches their silent arithmetic. Imagine the bone lover's smile reshaping wood shavings light as confetti but heavier with intent. And when imaginary water beads finally shimmer on your eyelids, let them stay. The spear is ready, weight balanced, handle cool, and there is nothing left to sharpen except the curl of your dreams. Before sunrise finds time to brighten a single shield edge, bead stringers have already seated themselves on woven mats near the embers, arranging shallow calabash bowls in a semicircle that resembles a quiet constellation. What they fashion is small enough to slip through a curled finger-narrow strings of ochre, white, and sky blue beads destined for armlets, anklets, and the thin sashes that stiffen courage by simply lying cool against skin. Yet behind those unassuming ornaments lies an entire bureaucracy of counting sticks, color recipes, and sinew threads tested against dew until they hum. Tonight, our fourth unhurried descent into the mechanics that precede a warrior. Dawn, we will watch these bead stringers so closely that even the beads seem large, rolling like sleepy stars across polished gourds before finding order. The beads begin their history as shards of ostrich eggshell collected during late dry season when some bleached fragments glint just enough to catch a hunter's peripheral vision. Children gather them, trading handfuls for songs learned by heart. At camp, each shard enters a wooden mortar where an apprentice, armed with a rounded pestle, pounds gently until the pieces shrink to flecks no bigger than lentils. These flecks then travel to the drill master, an elder who owns a bow, drill fitted with a porcupine quill. He selects a fleck, balances it on a pad of wet clay, and twirls the drill between palms 14 strokes forward, 14 strokes back until a neat sand-colored hole appears. If the hole wanders off center, the fleck falls to a discard pile soon destined for lime wash. Nothing wasted, but nothing paraded either. Accepted discs collect in a woven basket lined with buffalo fur to guard them from jostling. Clay beads arise differently. Fine rubber clay is kneaded with powdered charcoal until it feels like cooled candle wax. Beadmaker Nomisonto pinches a portion, rolling it beneath her palm into a snake no thicker than a lizard's tail. She slices the snake at measured finger widths, each slice gauged. Against the distance between the first and second joint of her smallest finger, a unit she calls a shadow. These little cylinders pierce easily with a thorn dipped in sesame oil. Once pierced, beads dry on reed racks. Their clay darkens as moisture flees, squeaking faintly like distant mice when wind brushes them. Firing takes place in a shallow pit. The fire's hush cooks them to pale russet. Nomizonto assesses dumbness by listening for a brittle ring when two beads kiss. Ledger note: 81 beads rang, 2 murmured. Murmured return to pit. Glass beads arrive via trade routes, stored within goatskin pouches stuffed with grass to prevent clink. Merchants favor colors matching dawn and dusk. Dusty rose, pale lemon, midnight blues so deep it drinks lamplight. Stringers pour these beads onto a flat tray scratched with concentric circles. Larger beads befriend the outer ring. Smaller find the center, sorting themselves with gravity and gentle fingertip nudges. Each bead's hole must accept a thread of sinew without protest. To test, apprentices use a fishbone needle that mimics future threading size. Where resistance whispers, a sliver of jackal thorn bark, sharpened to a scalpel, reams the opening with a quarter twist. Thread comes from the legs sinews of eland, soaked overnight in salted water until fibers peel like fringe. These strands dry stretched between 2 pegs hammered a spear's length apart, aligning the fibers. When morning sun warms sinew to pliancy, stringers burnish it with a smooth antler, sealing stray filaments. Before use, they pass sinew over beeswax, leaving a translucent sheen that smells faintly of meadow honey. Stretch testing follows. 2 ends loop around humble pegs. Apprentices lean backward until sinew hums. If it sings more than 3 heartbeats before breaking, it earns approval. Broken strands twist into cord for tying herb bundles. No strand retires idle. Pattern planning employs counting sticks. A bundle of reed splints, each marked with minuscule carvings, dots, dashes, and half-moons representing bead colors. A common armlet pattern reads dash dot for russet, white. Stick bundles rest in a pouch labeled with shell discs. Warriors select pattern bundles according to clan or personal memory. Tonight, a young warrior chooses pattern arrow flight, a sequence 4 beads long repeated until thread ends. Bead stringer Musa consults his ledger. Arrow flight requires 13 repeats for a wrist size measuring 7 shadow lengths. He lays 52 beads in 4 straight lines, then checks count with a whisper. 1, 2, 3, 4. Repeating until the ledger's margin acquires a tally of ticks, each shaped like a tiny spear. Threading begins under the flicker of cattle fat lamps. Musa waits the sun's tip, forming a taper that slips into the first ostrich shell bead. He draws bead to thread's midpoint, folds, then twists loose ends together 3 full turns, locking the bead as a stopper. From there, beads slide one by one, nudged into their positions by a fingernail shaped flat for that purpose. Every 7th bead added prompts a pause. Musa pulls lightly, seating beads snug but not coercive. Too tight invites future cracking, too loose leaves gaps where dust may squat. He tests tension against a yardstick carved from camel thorn, pressing the strand to see if it bows or lies obedient. Ledger phrase, strand behaved. Color sequence invites brief debate when 2 glass beads glow almost identically in lantern light. Musa rolls both under lamplight, observing how shadows nestle. He selects the one whose shadow edges blur, believing soft edges weave softer dreams. The other returns to bowl, maybe for tomorrow's inklet. Apprentices note this decision in scrap parchment because Musa's preferences help them anticipate future sortings. They yawn discreetly. Sorting beads tests eyesight as much as patience. When full-length threads, Musa knots ends using a fisherman's bend, adding a microscopic dot of tree gum that dries clear and flexible. Excess sinew snips with a knife blade honed on sandstone until edges reflect the moon. Cut-offs gather into a clay cup they will find life tomorrow as weft for repairing broken sling cords. Knot smoothness passes test. Musa rubs knot against his earlobe. If friction catches, he retrims. Tonight, friction stays silent. Finished armlets soak briefly in a lukewarm infusion of roibos, staining ostrich beads the faint color of twilight clouds, a final nod to dusk even though dawn assembly looms. They dry coiled around a polished stick, ensuring curve anticipates wrist shape. Inspection board, 3 elders, each whose own arms gleam with decades-old strands checks work. Their fingers glide over beads like gentlest rain. They listen for rattle. Perfect tension yields soft clink bereft of chatter. Ledger entry in copper plate claims 49 perfect strands, one designated near perfect for a bead chipped but still serviceable. That one goes to a reserve pouch marked with charcoal X toward dawn. Bead stringer set bowls aside. Sweep stray beads into small reed containers and extinguish cattle fat lamps by pinching wicks with damp fingertips. The camp's silence deepens, broken only by a single bead escaping a bowl, ticking across mat to rest against a calabash. No one chases it. The bead has elected solitude and will abide until sun finds it. Many moons later, historians examining surviving armlets under museum lights note that ostrich shell beads vary by fractions of a millimeter. They marvel at even spacing that couches each bead like punctuation in a poem too calm to read aloud. Curators trace charcoal X's on reserve pouches. They find near perfect strands unchanged, tension still whisper tight. They record observations on acid-free cards, themselves storing details in tidy drawers. The cycle of noticing, noting, and gently closing drawers mirrors bead stringers covering bowls at dawn. So as your own night draws toward its quieter moments, picture bowls of shell dust sliding like faded constellations, sinew strands humming under mild tension, and clay beads cooling with a brittle lull. Let your breaths arrange themselves in patterns of dash, dot, 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 inhale, pause, exhale, until the final bead finds its thread, not smooths, and eyelids close with the hush of lampwicks pinched to sleep. Before the first spear glints, and before even the most cautious rooster sends its tentative crow beyond the thorn fence, a different ceremony awakens, the deliberate simmering of morning. Isafalafala, a millet porridge, so mild that its steam resembles a question softly dissolving into dawn. In the Mbabala camp, porridge stewards are neither warriors nor artisans of loud craft. They are patient keepers of ratio, timing, and ember geometry. Their ledgers weigh ladles the way some generals weigh destinies, yet nothing in their notebooks raises a heartbeat above stroll pace. Tonight our fifth slow glide into the backstage of battle. We share the hush beside clay pots as water calculates itself toward a near-invisible boil. Stirring sticks make circles no wider than turtle shells and millet grains, count themselves into sleepy swirls. The porridge begins hours before water meets fire, when daylight still lounges beneath the horizon. An apprentice named Duma takes 2 calabashes, one filled with whole millet seeds harvested during the waxy moon, the other empty save for a carved reed straw. He places them beneath a reed-thatched shelter where dew forms drops predictable as tides. Duma inserts the straw into the empty calabash, places a thumb over its top, then dips into the dew that collects in a shallow clay dish overnight. By releasing his thumb, he captures drams of dew at a time, transferring them to the empty vessel. He repeats this gentle pipetting exactly 60 times, each count whispered. The number 60 is not mystical. It simply fills the calabash to half, the preferred volume for soaking grain without drowning it. Ledger notation, dew drams, 60, chill, cat's breath. The phrase cat's breath indicates water cold enough that a sleeping cat would not bother moving away. Millet joins dew shortly after. Each seed passes through a winnowing basket woven with gaps sized to retain grains but release dust chaff. Duma tilts the basket slowly, letting wind coax husk fragments away. No gust wanted. He waits for breeze mild as a sigh. If wind sleeps, he waves a woven fan shaped like half moon, measuring strokes by inhalations, 1 stroke per inhale, rest per exhale. When basket yields only mellow rustle and no scratch, grains fall into the dew, where they will languish 2 full turns of the constellation Islamella. Apprentices mark time by tapping a thin reed whip on the calabash rim every quarter hour. Tap sound should remain woody, not hollow. Hollow would suggest water absorbed, calling for an extra splash. Meanwhile, fire pit preparation commences. The pit is not a grand hearth, but a shallow depression lined with 3 stones arranged in scalene triangle, the longest side facing dawn, so pot handles never glare into watchers' eyes. Coals derived from knob barn logs burned to ember the previous night. They rest beneath a blanket of ash, looking asleep like puppies under dust. Steward Numby crouches and lifts ash corners with a cow rib, revealing cherry glow. She scatters broken acacia pods atop embers. Pods pop quietly, their shells cracking at random intervals akin to distant stepping feet. Those pops aerate the coal bed, exchanging sighs of oxygen. When glow brightens to a hue she calls drowsy peach, she settles clay trivet atop stones. Clay pot time. Porridge pot stands squat, belly round, mouth modest. Its surface bears shallow ridges like calm ripple across pond. Before use, Chombi pours a palmful of water onto inner wall and counts the bead's descent. If droplets crawl slower than 2 heartbeats, pot interior still carries protective smoke glaze. If faster, soot too thin, requiring a quick waft inside with smoldering dung chip. A chore unobtrusively done, leaving faint earthy perfume. Tonight droplets stroll leisurely, no extra smoking needed. Soaked millet meets pot next. Duma strains grain using reed sieve. Water flows back into calabash none wasted, later to priming. Millet enters pot in handfuls, alternating with sips of fresh spring water carried earlier. Ratio stands at 3 handfuls grain to 2 shovelfuls water. Handful defined as pile resting on cup palm wide as an adult's. Shelfful measured with half an ostrich eggshell whose rim thickness scribes itself yearly when new eggs appear. To confirm right ratio, they perform the floating test. A single grain dropped on surface should bob 3 times before sinking. The grain tonight bobs precisely thrice. Ledger note, float good. Omen of unhurried simmer. Stirring uses a stick carved from marula branch, flattened at end to mimic paddle tongue. Ntumbi places stick vertically into mixture, releases. If it stays upright, viscosity too high. If it falls instantly, too low. Tonight's stick holds angle of about 2 leaf widths from vertical ideal. She begins steering clockwise, forearm pivoting from elbow like slow pendulum. She hums 2-note lull, matching strokes. Hum on forward, silent on return. Each cycle lasts 1 breath. After 10 cycles, she reverses to counterclockwise, believing bidirectional swirl persuades starch evenly and discourages shy grains from clumping. Scribal assistant tracks cycles by dropping millet husks into a tiny bowl 1 husk per 10 rotations. Bowl capacity 20 husks, representing 200 strokes. At capacity, stirring pauses for resting stage. Resting stage, pot lid, a clay disc with a finger hole, settles atop. Steam escapes through the hole, swirling like ghost snail trails. During this 15-minute rest, attendants prepare flavor additive. Dry salt gathered from river mud flattened and sun-bleached, then ground with dried wild basil leaves into powder fine enough to ride breaths. They store this mixture in horn capped with beeswax. Exact dosage equals 3 pinches, pinches measured by index thumb gathered pressed against 3rd fingernail. Pinches sprinkled, not dumped. Surface patterns forming miniature archipelago before sinking. Tombi waits until each island disappears before restirring for 50 strokes to marry salt, ledger term. Heat management important. As porridge thickens, embers shrink. Firekeeper Mbali pushes 1 ember aside every 5 minutes using stick shyly glowing at its tip. Fewer embers bring simmer down to sub-bubble stage where surface trembles but refuses to break. Should a bubble rise, Mbali taps lid twice. Small admonishment. Bubble subsides like child returning to bed. Ledger marks. Bubbles scolded. 2. Average scolds per pot seldom exceeds 5 data comforts apprentices, though none know why. When porridge achieves texture they call blanket weight, spoon stands upright without assistance. To test, Tumbi carves a spoonful, lets it slide back. It stream folds onto itself like sleeping cattail done. She removes pot from trivet using folded goatskin pads, carrying to serving mat where bowls await. Bowls carved from gourd halves, hand-polished with quartz. Each bowl interior holds swirl pattern from tool marks, intentionally unsmoothed to catch heat glimpses. Portioning, 3 ladles per warrior, 2 for elders, 1 for apprentices. Ladle carved from acacia with bowl size of small mango. Ledger lists total ladles served tonight 126. Leftover porridge thins with remaining dew water, becoming drink called umwaza for children. No ledger needed. Children's giggles tally satisfaction. Pot rim wipes with damp cloth infused with lemongrass. Cloth hung on thorn to dry, scent driving insects away. Pot returns to ash pit, upside down, mouth cooling while interior warmth discourages rodents seeking starch nibble. A later sunrise finds warriors licking last specks. Their bellies warm, pace steady, they ready for shield drill. Very few think about dew pipetted 60 drams or paddle rotation counters. Yet that quiet arithmetic stands behind them like soft shadows, steady as ground. Historians examining old ledgers puzzle why bubble scold counts matter. Still they record them in footnotes because footnotes welcome gentle trivia. So tonight, as water pipe hum or city hush surrounds you, Imagine dewdrops guided into gourds, millet grains bobbing thrice, spoon tails crowing like sleepy cats. Let your breaths stir clockwise for 10 cycles, then counterclockwise, and picture each imaginary husk falling into tally bowl until bowl brims and stirring pauses. Accept scolded bubbles as minor rebellions soon calmed. Accept blanket weight as sign to rest. And allow your own thoughts to thicken into stillness ready for dawn's mild spoon. While most eyes linger on shields, spears, and plumes, a quieter barrier stands sentinel at every Imbabala encampment. The Isokuma sawed thorn fence, a living wall of hooked acacia, branches woven so deliberately that moonlight chooses to slip around rather than through it. Tended at night by fence keepers whose tools never clang and whose ledgers account for each thorn, angle as calmly as if towing sheep. The fence is less a fortification than a long, slow lullaby stretched in a circle. Tonight, our 10th unhurried drift through backstage serenity, we stroll alongside these thorn keepers, measuring branch overlap in finger segments, counting sap beads glistening like drowsy stars, and noting how many breaths one should pause after pushing a branch into place before stepping back to let its memory settle. The thorn harvest begins 3 days after the waxing half moon, when sap within hook thorns thickens just enough to coat pruned ends, sealing moisture inside. Gatherers venture to the dry riverbed at first hint of dawn, carrying loppers fashioned from kudu horn and iron scraps, blades sharpened on sandstone until edges reflect dawn's earliest blush. Each cut branch measures from elbow to fingertips, no more, no less, because that span balances easy carrying with optimal weave. They bind branches into bundles using twisted grass rope, 2 loops, reef knot. Nothing fancy, yet every bundle receives a charcoal tick mark from Scribe Thambeka, indicating time of cut and general direction on compass mat. Direction matters. Branches felled from the west side of thicket face afternoon sun and cured differently than eastern shade cousins. Bundles rest under reed awning until twilight, allowing leaves to wilt, hooks to harden, reducing their eager spring during weaving. Hook tension measured by simple test. Keeper presses thumb against hook tip. If nail bed pales at count of 2 heartbeats, hook ready. Too stiff means risk snapping. Too pliant means later drooping. Ledger column hook bite lists today's median as 2 beat pale, a phrase that sounds lyrical but satisfies arithmetic of readiness. Weaving commences long after camp hushes. 3 keepers form triangle formation, placer, holder, binder. The placer chooses branch, trims any side twig longer than half thumb, then seats butt end between 2 live fence stems. Holder, using forked stick carved smooth as river pebble, presses branch inward at 45-degree downward slant, ensuring hooks angle outward toward potential intruder, but never toward interior where sleeping children might stray. Binder loops pliant willow withies soaked in water pot labeled sine wave around juncture, pulls until withy hums a note described as lizard sigh. Too slack? No hum. Too tight? Twig snaps. Scribe records hum count a nightly concerto of muffled notes. Tonight as log begins. Size 128. Spacing obeys rule of 3. No gap larger than 3 closed fists may appear between adjoining branches. Rather than measuring constantly, keepers carry smooth river pebbles, each the size of 3 fists side by side. They try sliding pebble through weave. If pebble passes, they insert filler twig. Twigs come from previous trimming stored in clay jars sealed with beeswax. Pebble test seldom fails, yet scribes keep tally of gaps remedied. It's currently 8 per full moon cycle, trending downward to collective satisfaction. Sap care arrives next. Fresh cuts bleed milky latex. Keepers dab wound with ash categorized earlier as goat hide shade, using turkey wing brush. Ash dries latex, discourages ants from mining sugar. Dabbing motion counts 10 feather strokes clockwise around cut never counterclockwise, which tradition claims invites rot. After dab, branch rests. Keepers step back 3 paces, breathing slow to let thorn memory settle. Some say if you lean in, you can hear faint creak as fibers accept new angle, like floorboard adjusting after weight lifts. Every third branch receives a memory knot, slender strip of hair hide tied 2 turns around intersection, knot's tail trimmed flush. Memory knots mark monthly inspection points. Inspectors check for shrinkage. If hide tail curls, they note knot whispers, warning that branch may loosen come heavy wind. Tonight, 15 new whispers flagged. Ledger adds small ear-shaped doodle beside number, keeper humor. Illumination provided by oil saucers set on half-buried stakes. Wicks are twisted cotton dipped in tallow mixture scented with crushed marilla skin. Flame stays low, ember-like, offering glow enough for thorns, but not for gossip. Smoke drifts straight upward. Any flicker sideways alerts keepers to breeze shift, prompting tighter binding near that arc of fence. Weather column and ledger reads, smoke, lamplight rope north breath mild. Such lines sound poetic, purpose purely practical. After weaving stretch of 5 paces, team pauses for scholar's measure. Holder plucks reed whistle tuned to minor third. Puff sends soft note across fence interior. Sound waves tell density. Muffled note indicates weave dense. Clear note signals airy. Tonight notes lean toward velvet muffling good. Scribe marks whistle velvet. If too airy, filler twigs remedy until mix puff pleases. Dawn testing of perimeter finishes ritual. As first ibis call echoes, keepers circle exterior pressing small weighted ball leather pouch filled with river sand against fence at knee height. Ball should not squeeze through. Any give recorded for later dusk repair, but such failings rare. Ball test data, gives no. Keepers smile, rare grin behind measured calm. Cut ends gathered into small fire for insect smoke. Fire lives brief, embers added to ash keeper's reserve, completing circular economy camp embraces. Tools wiped with balm from previous episode, preventing rust and thinking implements for quiet cooperation. Archaeologists generations later uncover segment of fossilized thorn fence beneath collapsed crawl wall, hooks still angled outward. Soil core samples reveal ash traces around cut nodes, proving goat hide shade real. They hypothesize defense function only, missing hush and whistle velvet. Meanwhile, camp descendants retell how grandmothers measured gaps with pebble. Children mimic with pebbles along goat pens, believe they cast spells of hush around dreams. So, as night vines around your own dwelling, imagine hug thorns settling under moon, withy bindings humming lizard sigh, and pebble gauges gliding between lattice of measured calm. Let your breaths weave rule of 3. Inhale, pause, exhale. Again, until inner pebble finds no gap to slip through, and your thoughts anchor gently, hooks outward guarding rest. Long before any footstep creases the dew around the Imbabala encampment, a quieter procession begins at the riverside. The water bearers easing gourds into a current still so placid it seems merely thinking about movement. Their task collecting, sealing, allocating, and ultimately accounting for every swallow of water a regiment will sip by noon might not invite songs, yet it spins a web of ratios, dripping ledgers, and beeswax seals delicate enough to lull even the river itself. Tonight, our 7th gentle descent into the backstage arithmetic of a warrior's dawn. We drift alongside these water bearers, counting gourd neck diameters, listening to cork plugs swell in silence, and noting how many drops must cling. To a fingertip before a stopper earns its final twist, the gourds begin life as calabash, fruit planted in sandy flood meadow soil during the rainy season. When vines yellow and fruit skin wraps like dry drum, gatherers sever stems with knives sharpened on river stones, smoothed by generations of fish washing. Each fruit hangs from thorn branches for a fortnight, so sun coaxes moisture outwards, firming rind until fingernail leaves only whisper marks. Then comes hollowing. Apprentices cut a coin-sized circle at what will become the neck, loosen pulp with a spoon carved from warthog tusk, and shake seeds into clay bowls destined for next planting. Ledger columns track seed yield. Tonight's entry reads, Gourd batch 31, seeds 483, each digit formed larger than necessary, as though seeds themselves want breathing room on paper. Gourds cure beside smoky hearths, their interiors sucking in faint aroma that later discourages mold. When a polished clink replaces dull thud while tapping, gourds graduate to sanding. Surfaces scraped with dried cat's tail grass twined into loops, smoothing ridges until palm slides like boat over calm lagoon. Neck opening trimmed into oval, size to accept a finger's knuckle, neither too tight to impede cleaning nor too loose to waste beeswax. Trial fit uses an index finger wrapped in linen. If linen snags, rim gets one more rotation of grass rasp. Interior rinse ritual follows. Each gourd receives 3 washes, first with warm river water, second with infusion of crushed river reeds and charcoal absorbs, odor, and third with cool dew water pipetted similarly to the porridge apprentice's method. Dew water leaves a glint like tiny moons refusing to set. Gourds stand inverted on wooden pegs to dry. Watchers listen for drip frequency. When intervals between drips exceed the length of a soft hum, dryness considered adequate. Ledger's log drip counts under heading echo drops, though nobody can explain why echo. The name predates memory and thus stands immune to revision. Stopper. Crafting employs corkwood collected from wild fig branches. Branch segments boil in lightly salted water until pith sponges. Once cooled, artisans shave them into tapered plugs, each measured against bronze gauge rods, indicating 3 standard girths. Plugs soak overnight in a bath of beeswax melted with a trace of marula oil, which grants aromatic pliancy. In morning, waxy plugs cool to warmth of a resting hand. To test fit, plug presses into neck, then string attaches at plug's top loop. Bearer swings gourd by string, 2 rotations. If plug trembles free, wax infiltration inadequate, plug returns to bath. If it stays, bearer sniffs rim any hint of wax sweetness escaping signals imperfect seal. 2 more dips remedy, capacity. Measurement emerges next. Gourds line a bench where apprentices ladle water using half-shell scoops. 1 scoop equals 6 heartbeats to fill. They pour until water crowns neck, then siphon out 1 scoop, ensuring air gap guards against heat. Expansion. Count of ladles becomes gourd's capacity mark, incised as short dashes below neck. 3 dashes indicate small, approximately equals 1 liter. 5 dashes medium, 8 dashes large. Night scribe's copy dash tallies into scrolls stitched from goat parchment, mapping which bearer holds which volume. Mapping ensures ration distribution later. No warrior sips envy into throat. Before sunrise, bearers descend to river with stripped feet to read Sand's language about crocodile patrols. Fresh slide marks mean choose farther bend. Tonight Sand writes only wins leisurely story safe. Bearers immerse gourds neck deep, allowing water to creep rather than rush. The first gourd returns upstream before second enters a single file courtesy preventing silt swirl. Filled gourds weigh against woven sling scale, a forked branch hung by fiber rope between 2 trees. Bearer steps onto notch, holds gourd. If branch settles to chalk mark carved mid-trunk, capacity fulfilled. Chalk mark derived seasons earlier by comparing gourd weight to handful count of millet. Tradition persists even though millet no longer factors calibration accepted. Like lullaby repeated long after meaning dims, sealed gourds travel back suspended from shoulder poles balanced across collarbones. Poles carved of lightweight sycamore, ends drilled to accept goat hide loops. Each loop's length measured to keep gourds from bumping hips. Sound of sloshing permitted, but only faint. Louder slosh implies air gap misjudged. When such sound arises, bearer notes on palm with charcoal. Diagonal slash meaning air. Upon return, steward unplugs cord, adds spoon of water, reseals, chalks ledger, air remedied. Chalk later dusted off the correction ephemeral as sigh. Distribution sequence begins near communal fire. Stewards arrange gourds by dash. Count largest at rear. Warriors approach in order of need. Shield drill first, spear practice second, runners last. Each warrior flips gourd once to judge weight or ritual verification though. Trust runs deep. They unstopper, swallow exactly. 3 mouthfuls, stopper again, pass to next. Counting mouthfuls keeps parity. Mouthful defined as sip lasting 2 heartbeats. Some sip slower but swallow smaller, equilibrium of custom. Remaining water returns to rack for later a system, so tidy few words accompany it. Maintenance of empty gourds involves breeze cure. After rinse, stoppers removed, gourds hang upside down from eave where warm drafts slide through neck, performing invisible dance with residual droplets. Apprentices gently tap base. If hollow note rings, dryness complete. They smell interior. If still wax sweet fine. If earthy whiff emerges, gourd requires thin layer of crushed rosemary twig inserted overnight, then removed. Only 7 gourds in current ledger show rosemary use. Remark penned proud in margin. Rot shy. Years later, visiting ethnographies marvel at gourds beeswax plugs still fragrant. They slice section to examine wax layers, counting growth like tree rings, each redip leaves faint line. One specimen holds 14 lines, telling story of 14 campaigns. The ledger where those lines appear reads simply, gourd 7 M seals refreshed often. Museum placard abbreviates narrative to Calabash water vessel, 19th C. Yet inside wax, river dew from long ago still slumbers, locked in micro pockets. Echo drops preserve dot, so let your own evening thoughts become gourds. Hollowed of busier pulp, rinsed with dew, filled at safe bend, sealed wax tight. Picture plugs twirled into place, dashes in size beneath neck like calm breaths taken in darkness. Here slosh faint, but reassuring, not turbulent. Turn gourd once, measure weight against heart's chalk mark. Sip 3 mouthfuls, inhale 1. Exhale 2, rest and envision air gap closing gently as stopper seats. Then hang the vessel upside down in mind's rafters until final droplets echo hush. A night's breeze cures everything dry enough for dream storage until tomorrow's. Dawn requires another measured fill. Even before the first ember from last night's cooking hearth surrenders its shy glow to pale ash, a small company of ash keepers gathers in the half-light, armed with gourd scoops, goat-hide bellows, and ledgers heavier than one would. Suppose loose dust could justify their duty harvesting, sorting, and redistributing yesterday's fire ash so that today's cooking, forging, and drum skin warming may begin might seem nothing more than tidying. Yet every scoopful hides arithmetic about carbon content, ember memory, and the agreeable hiss that damp ash offers when nudged back toward flame. Tonight our 8th unhurried glide through the backstage hush of an Imbabala dawn. We kneel with these ash keepers, counting scoop angles, comparing grayscale shades by moonlit reference tiles, and discovering how much ash a single sneeze displaces when one fails to hold breath at the wrong moment. The hearth, circular and edged with stone fragments, rests in the camp's quiet center like a sleepy planet ringed by last night's footprints. Embers lie buried beneath a soft crust of white and dove gray ash, still emitting heat gentle enough to warm the ankle bones of early passers-by. Chief Ashkeeper Kulikani approaches first, carrying a reed mat rolled tight as a cattle herd scroll. He unrolls it beside hearth, revealing several small tiles of sun-baked clay, each smeared with a stripe of ash shade from almost ivory to deep slate. These reference tiles, refreshed fortnightly, allow keepers to gauge carbon richness visually. In ledger margins, they call the lightest new moon, the darkest storm cloud. Between lie dawn mist, goat hide, and quiet slate. Ash harvesting commences with a gourd scoop whose edge has been sanded to dullness, ensuring it lifts ash without cutting into embers. Quillicany sinks scoop gently, angling to remove top layer no thicker than a sparrow's wing. He tilts contents onto a shallow woven tray. Each scoopful spreads like powdered sugar, and apprentices lean close, comparing its shade to tiles. One apprentice, Lindywa, holds up dawn mist tile. Ash matches. Ledger receives first entry. Scoop 1, DM. DM shorthand repeats until another shade appears. If scoop reveals darker flecks, sign of unburnt charcoal category becomes quiet slate, promising reuse in smithy where hotter fires needed. Lighter new moon ash later fertilizes vegetable patch outside thorn fence. Sorting trays sit on low stump desks. Apprentices tilt tray corners subtly. Lighter particles slide quicker than dense charcoal specks. Using feather sticks, they flick heavier bits into a side gourd. Each flick counted aloud in half voice, 1 click per flick. When flicks reach 30, apprentice pauses to rest wrist, sipping dew water from shell cup. Ledger note, tray A flicks, 30 wrists, fine. Such wrist status updates appear comically serious, but help monitor novice strain. An overtired flick hand might sneeze cloud into wind. Meanwhile, Quillicany reveals ember core glowing seeds. Of yesterday's stories. With a split acacia branch, he teases embers into small pile offset from central pit. He counts embers by size. Those larger than a guinea fowl's egg earn designation keeper hearts. Today 9 hearts surface. Hearts lay on a stone slab cushioned by thin ash layer, preventing sudden chill. A goat high bellows, then exhales 3 slow breaths over hearts, no more, lest they flare prematurely. Bellows fabric squeaks faintly, note scribes render as leather hum. They record each hum, not for necessity but tradition. While embers rest, selection of ash for drum skin warming begins. Drum craftsmen prefer goat hide, shade midway mixed with slivered marula bark to impart mild aroma. Apprentice. Sipho measures 2 gourd scoops of goat hide ash into clay pot, adds 1 scoop bark. He stirs with spoon carved from giraffe bone, counting 24 turns clockwise, then 12 counter. Numbers derived from elders' memory of lunar cycles. The men question. Sipho tests blend by pinching. If ash slips through fingers like silk thread, humidity acceptable. 2 clumpy means ash absorbed night damp. Remedy involves spreading thin layer near ember's edge for 5 breaths to dry. Ledger tallies how many breath cycles required. Average seldom exceeds 2. Pottery kiln attendants also await ash butt, of darker storm cloud type mixed with ember chips. Quillicany allocates 3 scoops to separate basket. He sprinkles handful of water, hears faint sizzle confirmation charcoal content high. He smiles, small victory over unpredictability of combustion. Notebook receives smile shape drawn beside entry. Scribes allow doodles only for charcoal victories. Reasoning morale matters even in monotony. Now, embers return to duty. Quillicany transfers hearts onto fresh mound of goat hide ash inside hearth center, nudging edges with curved stick until embers nestle like chicks under feathers. He layers straw top just enough to greet flame, then waves blanket of thin bark slats to direct early smoke away from sleeping huts. Straw ignites lazily, flames curl, coaxed by bellows single breath. Ash keepers log ignition time, sun yet below horizon by width of 1 pinky held at arm's length. A standard documenting seasonal drift, secondary hearth spark necks, smithy, porch corner, resin boiling nook. Each receives ember heart delivered on flat shovel, lined with damp leaves preventing stray ash spill. Delivery paths traced in sand earlier, cleared of pebbles so embers ride smooth. If hurt dims en route, bearer stops, fans gently, logs glimmer pause. Today, Zero Glimmer pauses a quiet triumph recorded with another doodle. This of tiny flame, cleaning original pit now possible. Remaining fine ash swept with turkey wing brush into clay bin. Brush strokes counted, each 10 strokes prompt tap of stick. Taps counted, numbers feed ledger's fascination. When brush finishes, pit stones wiped with damp reed sponge leaving. Faint streaks like morning clouds. Sponge rinse water poured on herb patch sage and wild basil relish potash minerals. Ledger underscores this gift. Garden thank. Storage of sorted ash occupies woven baskets lined with cow dung plaster cured to ceramic hardness. Lining prevents humidity intrusion. Baskets' lids tie using twisted grass cords, 17 twists per strand, standard found to survive rainy gusts. Knots. For lids, they choose square knots for quick release. A red thread tags storm cloud, basket, white thread, new moon, unmarked, dawn mist, assumed default. Inventory list updated. Outflow versus inflow table balanced by midday and drowsy. Columns.curators centuries later examine one such basket excavated from collapsed hut foundation. Inside ash still stratified by shade, bottom layer darkest, top light. Chemical tests reveal ratios of calcium carbonate that match ledger abbreviations. Researchers marvel. They publish paper but fail to capture hush of turkey wing brush. Or leather hum of bellows intangibles wisp away like smoke uncorked dots. So, as night's embers within your own thoughts settle, imagine gourd scoop lifting ash finer than daydream dust. Tiles of new moon through storm cloud, awaiting comparison, and ledgers thick with doodled smiles over charcoal victories. Let your breathing mimic tray tilts inhale, ash slides right. Exhale, flick heavy specks aside. Allow each ember heart to glow softly under goat hide bellows, warming the calm ground of your mind until the spark of anxiety dissipates into manageable ash, sorted and labeled for future. Gardens of ambition. Before the first shout calls warriors toward the distant ridgeline, a subtler craft unfolds behind reed screens. The quiet production of Yumathi Wesikumba, the skin balm that keeps heels from cracking, spear grips from slipping, and less obviously ledger pages from curling in humid air. The balm makers, an almost invisible guild of herb grinders, fat renderers, and gourd stopper counters, rise in darkness so absolute that even moths hesitate to flutter. Their work is neither blazing nor fragrant. It is a measured seep of oils, a muted whistle through hollow reeds, and a long list of ratios recited softly enough that dawn itself must lean closer to overhear. Tonight, our 9th meandering step through the backstage hush of an Mbabala dawn. We linger among these balm makers, watching goat tallow melt bead by bead, counting hibiscus seeds ground into feather-light dust, and noting exactly how long. A clay lid should remain ajar before the balm consents to settle dot. It starts with fat, always fat. Goats harvested at last lunar waxing gift, patches of back tallow stored in cool shadow hut trays, lined with crushed wild mint. The mint discourages ants and lends the faintest echo of green when fats later warm. Chief renderer Becky Sisa selects pieces no larger than his closed fist. Anything bigger discourages even melting and invites hidden gristle. He drops cubes into a shallow iron pot perched atop 3 pebbles within a ring of dawn mist, ash left over from the ash keepers. Earlier labor. Pebble-sized matters. Each compares to thumb's first joint, an unlikely but consistent gauge. Ledger note opens, pot Ren, stones 3, thumb mo 1. Ren refers to the particular pot. Its rim chipped to resemble small bird beak. Heat arises from embers gifted by ash crew, specifically 2 keeper hearts, and a sprinkle of straw for whisper flame. Becky Sisa lets fat surrender slowly. If liquefying whispers, he smiles. If it pops, he lifts pot off heat for 4 heartbeats. Pops recorded, with a small X in margin. 3 pops or fewer mean good day. Tonight, only 1. Melted tallow clarifies when golden haze vanishes. He skims foamy layer with ladle carved from waterbuck horn. Deposits scum onto leaf plate bound for soap, making nothing wasted. Even impurities find postscript dot while tallow sighs. Apprentice Zanel prepares dry ingredients. Ground hibiscus, seed, powdered aloe rind, and a pinch of fine river sand. She grinds seeds on stone slab, pressing wooden pestles so steadily that each push matches fleeting night breeze. For proper fineness, she pinches powder, feeling for grit finer than termite mound dust. Any roughness cues 5 extra pestle circles. Aloe rind, sun-dried, grinds quicker, lodging floral scent. River sand, Y sand and balm, provides tiniest. Abrasion assisting balm to seat into skin grooves. Sand passes through cloth sieve reminiscent of spider web. Only grains small as new thoughts pass. Dry components measured by reed scoops. 2 scoops seed, 1 scoop aloe, half scoop sand. Scoops. Tied together with grass twists, the trio nicknamed 2 1/2. Twist replaced monthly when grass yellows. Replacement day earns ledger star. Today's still mid-cycle. Green twist stands firm. Measurements tumble into small clay bowl. Waiting, back to tallow. Liquid gold ready for infusion. Bekisisa removes. Pot from pebble stand. Let sit exactly 6 breaths to slip under boil line breaths. Measured by slow nose exhales so faint it barely fogs air. Dry mix sprinkles in, causing faint swirl patterns like cloud trails on beer froth. He stirs with reed spatula for a count of 60 heartbeats. Left hand on chest, right hand stirring, a quiet duet. Stirring direction clockwise for first 40. Counterclockwise, 20 pattern memorializing migration stories told to children at firesides. Ledger annotation marks, swirls 60, 40 CW, 20 CCW. While mixture is still mobile, Zanel uncorks gourd of beeswax flakes gleaned from previous. Seasons honey harvest. Flakes shaped like curled petals, smell reminding one of old candles. 3 pinches settle onto surface. They melt lazily, sinking like memories into dream. Temperature judged by time wax needs to vanish. Ideal between 8 and 11 heartbeats. She counts. Tonight 9. Good dot now, essential herb. Crushed leaves of imfefo. Wild sage with silvery underside used for ritual smoke, but here ground into whisper dust. Only a knife tip amount added. Too much overpowers settlement echo. Dust clings atop liquid, slowly islands away. Bekisisa waits until last island drowns. Waiting occupies 20 breaths. During this, he taps rim lightly with reed, producing hollow toke. If tone alters between taps, mixture thickening too swiftly, but tonight tone stays loyal. Cooling stage crucial. Pot slides from hearth to circular pit of new moon ash, insulating base while allowing sides to breathe. Clay lid rests askew, gap thickness of goat eyelash. Gap permits vapors to flee, yet deters curious beetles attracted by warmth. Gap timing. Lid left ajar until mixture sheen dulls from mirror to satin, usually 15 minutes marked by turning. A small hourglass filled with ground maize. Glass empties. Satin arrives. Lid sealed fully. During cool, attention turns to containers. Gourds trimmed into squat jars. Interiors rinse with decoction of ginger root to discourage rancid scent. Rinse poured out, gourds dried with strip of linen rotated inside like lazy. Screw counts 7 twists each jar. Jar necks fitted with corkwood stoppers, earlier dipped in melted wax to create sealridge. Each stopper bears tiny cut of ostrich plume identifying batch white for current moon. Previous batches show gray, black, or faintly pink hues. Archivist Sazi records plume color codes in his thick notebook. Codes ensure traceability should balm cause reaction. None have so far. Still, codes persist because careful repetition sedates. Unpredictability dot after cool. Balm ladled with spoon carved from hippo ivory, scrap 1 ladle per jar, then return along same sequence to top off settling dips. Jar rims wiped with linen square, moistened in dew. Dew droplet count per wipe, 2. More smears wax, fewer leaves residue. Lid pressed, wax ring oozes tiny bead keeper, wipes bead. Polishes with finger until invisible. Finished jars lying reed shelf near entrance where dawn draft maintains dryness. Ledger reveals tonight's yield. 14 jars full, 1 3/4. Marked practice cuts, none cracked. Cracks rare. When jar cracked last rainy season, Ledger recorded jar burial along banana plant roots. Balm returning to earth gracefully. Warriors. Arrive later, retrieve jar by plume color matching headband adornment chart. Each warms dollop between palms, massages into heel, spear grip, or ledger page margins to waterproof. Yes, scribes rub minuscule balm along lower manuscript edges. 1 swipe repels dew, prevents curling corners. Thus balm connects foot, weapon, word. Months later, artifact collectors find jar fragments, detect mint sage scent still faint. Chemical tests reveal beeswax plus fatty acids consistent with goat tallow, aloe derivative components, microscopic quartz grains from river sand, and trace pollen from imphefo. Scientists publish findings. Footnote mentions eyelash gap cooling, but misstates thickness as goat whisker knot eyelash. Guild members now elder smile at inaccuracy, keep secret dots so as night balm readies your own rest. Imagine goat tallow cubes melting bead by bead, reed spatula tracing 60 quiet circles, lid propped eyelash thin while satin hush settles. Picture inhaling mint sage breath, exhaling tension into new moon ash. Let each breath draw 2 scoops calm, 1 scoop ease, half scoop dreamer's sand, stirred 40 clockwise. 20 counter as ledger prescribes until your thoughts thicken, cool, and seal themselves under plume-capped calm to wait untouched until sunrise requires new softness. While most eyes linger on shields, beers, and plumes, a quieter barrier stands sentinel at every Imbabala encampment. The Isakuma sod thorn fence, a living wall of hooked acacia branches woven so deliberately that moonlight chooses to slip around rather than through it. Tended at night by fence keepers whose tools never clang and whose ledgers account for each thorn's angle as calmly as if telling sheep. The fence is less a fortification than a long, slow lullaby stretched in a circle. Tonight, our 10th unhurried drift through backstage serenity, we stroll alongside these thorn keepers, measuring branch overlap and finger segments, counting sap beads glistening like drowsy stars, and noting how many breaths one should pause after pushing a branch into place before stepping back to let its memory settle. The thorn harvest begins 3 days after the waxing half moon, when sap within hook thorns thickens just enough to coat prune ends, sealing moisture inside. Gatherers venture to the dry riverbed at first hint of dawn, carrying loppers fashioned from kudu horn and iron scraps, blades sharpened on sandstone until edges reflect dawn's earliest blush. Each cut branch measures from elbow to fingertips, no more, no less, because that span balances easy carrying with optimal weave. They bind branches into bundles using twisted grass rope, 2 loops, reef knot. Nothing fancy, yet every bundle receives a charcoal tick mark from scribe Thembeke, indicating time of cut and general direction on compass mat. Direction matters. Branches felled from the west side of thicket face afternoon sun, and cure differently than eastern shade cousins. Bundles rest under reed awning until twilight, allowing leaves to wilt, hooks to harden, reducing their eager spring during weaving. Hook tension measured by simple test. Keeper presses thumb against hook tip. If nail bed pales at count of 2 heartbeats, hook ready. Too stiff means risk snapping. Too pliant means later drooping. Ledger column hook bite lists today's median as 2 beat pale, a phrase that sounds lyrical but satisfies arithmetic of readiness. Weaving commences long after camp hushes. 3 keepers form triangle formation: placer, holder, binder. The placer chooses branch, trims any side twig longer than half thumb, then seats butt end between 2 live fence stems. Holder, using forked stick carved smooth as river pebble, presses branch inward at 45-degree downward slant, ensuring hooks angle outward toward potential intruder, but never toward interior where sleeping children might stray. Binder loops. Pliant willow withies soaked in water pot labeled sine wave around juncture. Pulls until withy hums a note described as lizard sigh. Too slack, no hum. Too tight, twig snaps. Scribe records hum count a nightly concerto of muffled notes. Tonight's log begins size 128. Spacing obeys rule of 3. No gap larger than 3 closed fists may appear between adjoining branches. Rather than measuring constantly, keepers carry smooth river pebbles, each the size of 3 fists side by side. They try sliding pebble through weave. If pebble passes, they insert filler twig. Twigs come from previous trimming stored in clay jar sealed with beeswax. Pebble test seldom fails, yet scribes keep tally of gaps remedied. It's currently 8 per full moon cycle, trending downward to collective satisfaction. Sap carrot arrives next. Fresh cuts bleed milky latex. Keepers dab wound with ash categorized earlier as goat hide shade, using turkey wing brush. Ash dries latex, discourages ants from mining sugar. Dabbing motion counts 10 feather strokes clockwise around cut, never counterclockwise, which tradition claims invites rot. After dab, branch rests. Keepers step back 3 paces, breathing, slow to let thorn memories settle. Some say if you lean in, you can hear faint creak as fibers accept new angle, like floorboard adjusting after weight lifts. Every 3rd branch receives a memory knot. Slender strip of hair hide tied 2 turns around intersection. Knot's tail. Trimmed flush. Memory knots mark monthly inspection points. Inspectors check for shrinkage. If hide tail curls, they note, not whispers, warning that branch may loosen come heavy wind. Tonight, 15 new whispers flagged. Ledger adds small ear-shaped doodle beside number. Keeper humor. Illumination provided by oil saucers set on half-buried steaks. Wicks are twisted cotton dipped in tallow mixture scented with crushed marula skin. Flame stays low, ember-like, offering glow enough for thorns, but not for gossip. Smoke drifts straight upward. Any flicker sideways alerts keepers to breeze shift, prompting tighter binding near that arc of fence. Weather column and ledger reads, smoke, lamplight rope north, breath mild. Such lines sound poetic, purpose purely practical. After weaving. Stretch of 5 paces, team pauses for scholar's measure. Holder plucks reed whistle tuned to minor 3rd. Puffs and soft note across fence interior. Sound waves tell density. Muffled note indicates weave dense. Clear note signals airy. Tonight notes lean toward velvet muffling. Good. Scribe marks whistle velvet. If too airy, filler twigs remedy until next puff pleases. Dawn testing of perimeter finishes ritual. As first ibis call echoes, keepers circle exterior, pressing small weighted ball leather pouch filled with river sand against fence at knee height. Ball should not squeeze through. Any give recorded for later dusk repair, but such failings rare. Ball test data gives nil. Keepers smile, rare grin behind measured calm. Cut ends gathered into small fire for insect smoke. Fire lives brief, embers added to ash keeper's reserve, completing circular economy camp embraces. Tools wiped with balm from previous episode, preventing rust and thanking implements for quiet cooperation. Archaeologists, generations later, uncover segment of fossilized thorn fence beneath collapsed curl wall, hooks still angled outward. Soil core samples reveal ash traces around cut nodes, proving goat hide shade real. They hypothesize defense function only, missing hush and whistle velvet. Meanwhile, camp descendants retell how grandmothers measured gaps with pebble. Children mimic with pebbles along goat pens, believe they cast spells of hush around dreams dot, so as night vines around your own dwelling. Imagine hook thorns settling under moon, with the bindings humming lizard sigh, and pebble gauges gliding between lattice of measured calm. Let your breaths weave rule of 3. Inhale, pause, exhale. Again, until inner pebble finds no gap to slip through, and your thoughts anchor gently, hooks outward guarding rest. Long after the last spear has been inspected, the last thorn has settled into its outward gaze, and even the embers have agreed to glow no brighter than a beetle's eye. A small circle of scribes remains awake beneath a lantern the color of weak tea. Their task is neither martial nor musical. They are simply copying, mending, and ever so gently coaxing the day's ledgers into the neat bundles that will survive tomorrow's dust, next season's rains, and though they never say. So generations of sleepy historians yet unborn. Tonight, our 11th and final unhurried passage through the backstage hush of an Imbabala dawn. We lean over their reed mats, watching quills trimmed to eyelash angles, counting knots and sinew thread binding folios, and timing how long ink must sigh on bark paper before its sheen dulls sufficiently for pages to turn without sticking. The scribe's hut sits at camp's quietest edge, where even goats hesitate to bleat lest they smear the air with unnecessary consonants. Inside, low benches circle a central inkstone carved from river slate. Chief Scribe Nomho begins by grinding pigment, soot scraped from previous night's cooking pot, the goat tallow one, still faint with mint, mixed with ash shade new moon, carefully pinched from the ashkeeper's reserve. She adds 3 drops of dew water collected during porridge prep, and 1 drop of rendered beeswax balm. Yes, the same balm sealing heels, stirring with a porcupine quill paddle, until mixture thickens to the consistency of melted shadow. Ledger entries will later call this Shadow Ink 31. 31 denoting day of moon count. Paper here is not papyrus nor parchment, but bark sheets peeled from wild fig stems, pressed under flat stones for a full moon until fibers forget their curling. Habit. Sheets trimmed using obsidian flake blades sharpened on hippo ivory powder. Trim width. 2 reed stock diameters beyond text margin scribes. Measure by placing twin reeds side by side at edge before slicing. Trimmings serve as tinder for next evening's inkstone fire. Nothing wanders far from cycle. Quills require fuss. Feather keepers provide them. Vulture flight feathers for main strokes, guinea fowl for fine notations, ostrich plumes trimmed into stub pens for ledger doodles. Each quill tip cuts at 7-degree bevel, angle proven by sliding quill along, groove carved into wooden template marked with miniature notch. When sip of river sand sprinkled onto groove meets no resistance, bevel perfect. Quills rest in gourd half filled with warm sand to swell shafts tight around sharpened cane inserts, preventing ink leaks. Ledger margin notes which quill wrote which page. A later scholar might trace handwriting quirks back to bird species. Binding. String emerges from harehide sinews soaked midday, then dried under thorn fence shade. Master binder Zukisa counts sinew strands aloud 1, 2, 3, then reverse 3, 2, 1, plating them into cord no thicker than baby moth leg. She rubs cord across block of goat tallow balm, giving it wax coat resisting mildew. A wormed bone needle, its eye drilled with ant mandible awl, threads the cord through pairs of punch holes along ledger spine. Holes spaced 1 thumb width. Punch uses thorn from yesterday's fence making spares. Each pull of thread records faint music of friction, a lullaby for parchment. Copying begins with page humidification. Scribes wave palm frond fans over bark sheet stack, counting fanning. Strokes 9 slow, 9 slower drawing dew. Soft moisture into fibers, so ink spreads predictably, not scurry. Chief scribe tests readiness by dribbling single ink drop on sample strip. If circle holds, good. If edges feather, fans again 3 strokes. This drop ritual repeated each new ink batch, recorded under bleed trials. Only one bleed trial. Failed this season. Entry ringed with doodle that resembles embarrassed owl. Scribes copy today's tallies. Goats traded. Dewdrams pipetted. Hookthorn whispers flagged. Wrist flick counts. Each figure transcribed, twice first bold with vulture quill, second faint with giddy fowl just beneath. Redundancy assures legibility if time or insects nibble one layer. Between numbers, they add modest descriptors. Hook bite paled in. 2 beats. Ember heart count 9 bright. Memory knot whispers 15. Descriptors serve as lull-lacing facts, giving future readers gentle context so brain may wander without cliff dives. Ink drying overseen by timing stone. A flat pebble with circles scratched into face. A drip of melted goat tallow dropped at. Circle's edge travels toward center as it cools. When tallow dome halves in height, ink judged dry. Tonight's dome halves after 15 breaths. During this wait, scribes sip water from small gourd and hum tune of bead stringers dashed tatmered. Each hum aligning with breath, reinforcing camp's unspoken metronome. Finished sheets pile under pressboard weighted with smooth river. Stones flagged for record purpose by faint ochre X marks. Weight consistent. 3 stones equal in heft to combined mass of 5 empty calabash water gourds, medium. Calculation scribes keep small table converting stone weight to gourds. To millet scoops cross-unit consistency comforts them. Board rests until dawnlight warms hut wall. At sunrise, binder stitches stack into spine with quiet love not in. Out, around. Through then adds bone tag indicating moon phase by carved crescent depth. Completed ledger slides into shelf built. From acacia boards whose surfaces lightly treated with balm to repel nibbling beetles. Shelf slots labeled by ebony inserts, shaped like spearheads pointing upward for odd number moons, downward for even. Tonight ledger belongs odd, so top row, 3rd slot marked by tiny chalk star. Nomhole traces finger along spines, whispers inventory. 72 stories safe. Whispers soft enough not to awaken them dot sometimes. Mid-copy, perched moth lands on wet ink, leaving tiny wing print fossil inside character. Scribes leave prints, unscraped Colvin dream stamps and note. Location and margin. Dream stamps regarded as minor luck tokens. Warriors receiving ledgers for training instructions search for them, rumored to avert spear slips. Modern conservationists marvel at wing imprints still faintly gleaming under magnification. They publish paper lepidopteral accretions in 19th century. In Goonie ledgers, missing soft grin scribes shared on finding first stamp. Finally, tools cleaned. Quills rinsed and trickle of rosemary-scented water, tips dried by wicking onto linen. Inkstone wiped with reed stem, residual pigment mixed with ash, and pressed into pellet for tomorrow's first grind. Bone needle's eye cleared with single. Horsehair. All instruments laid on reed rack like weary birds perched before migrating dreams. Exterior hush deepens. Thorn fence casts slow shadow. Hook tips glint faint. Scribes extinguish lamp by pinching wick with 2 wet fingers. Hiss. Brief as question mark. Hut door closes with sigh. Inside shelves stand like silent chorus prepared to recite when morning curiosity knocks dot. So, as this final night settles around your own pages, whether real or imagined, picture sit mixed with dew until shadow melts into words. Quill soaked. in warm sand and goat telodomes collapsing at measured breath count. Let your thoughts duplicate themselves in faint second strokes beneath bold first lines, redundancy soothing fear of forgetting. Inhale while lamp's weak tea light flickers. Exhale when wick pinched, hiss fades. When shelves of stories whisper, 72 safe, join them, spine relaxed, mind cataloged. Sleeping between bark covers until new moon invites fresh ink whisper tomorrow.